and a daughter, just like you and me. Right? It allows us to really feel a different kind of connection. And that is the humanity and the connection of the ummah that the Prophet ﷺ so often talked about. That he said, Al-Muslimuna and Al-Mu'minuna ka-jasadin wahid. That people, the believers are like one body. إن اشتكى عينه اشتكى كله وإن اشتكى رأسه اشتكى كله. That one part of the body, feels pain. If the head feels pain, the whole body feels pain. You can really, if you ever are sick, and you may have a sickness, be it some sinus thing, or maybe you got a broken leg, or whatever the case may be. You know what? Your other body is doing better than the part that's in pain, but your whole body slows down. Right? In a sense that is how we should be feeling, not to the point of debilitation, because if the whole body shuts down, what happens? You die. So our job is not to feel the pain and die. Our job is to feel the pain, and then the body says, well, let the rest of us send resources to go and help there. Right? And that's exactly what the body does. That's exactly what the body does. I'm not a doctor, so don't quote me on the technicality of this, but when somebody's in extreme cold, people will often lose their limbs first, particularly their fingers and their toes. Why? Because we think we're the furthest, right? And so we need to give our resources to, the main body. And that's in extreme cases. But normally it's, the main body, the heart and the lungs and the brains, they need most of the blood and the heat. So let's prioritize those. Let's give our resources over to them. And that's, as an ummah, what we should do. Right? If we know that, alhamdulillah, especially here, Allah has blessed so many of us with wealth and with food, with education, that can I use some of that to help people who are lacking or who need it more than I do, at least at this current moment. So when we talk about Sudan, Sudan itself is more so an Arabic name, from like aswad, from literally meaning like the color black. And and so when you say Biladu Sudan or Aldu Sudan, we're talking about not just what we call the country, but it's a larger, broader area. And over time, the size of what was considered Sudan, grew and shrunk. It's also called the Sahil, the belt of Western Central Africa. Basically, so it can be considered a bubble around the country, or it could also be considered an entire strip, which is whatever is south of the Saharan desert and north of the savannas. Geographically, what we consider as Sudan today, right? To the north is Egypt, to the northeast is the Red Sea, and beyond that is Saudi Arabia. To the east is Eritrea and Ethiopia. To the southeast is Kenya. To the south is Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. To the west is Chad and the Central African Republic. And to the northwest is Libya. As for what countries are primarily, modern day countries are primarily going to fall under the area we're talking about, it's going to be the Republic of Sudan, as what it is today, and South Sudan. In South Sudan, that 2005, 2011, broke away as their own country. And so again, in our most of the discussion that we have, we're not necessarily talking about the modern country of Sudan, but a general, slightly smaller, slightly larger bubble around that general area. Because depending on the kingdom, depending on the government, depending on what era we're talking about, that land was slightly bigger, slightly smaller. And just some of the points that we should keep in mind, one of the important geographical points that we'll touch upon is going to be the Nile River. The Nile River starts, it's weird for us to think about it like this because we very much see a map as north to south, up to down, but the Nile River actually flows from south to north. So it flows like up the map, which is normal, but for our minds it just seems a little bit weird. So it starts at Lake Victoria, which is in Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda. And here you already get an idea about where some of the modern day problem starts. How is a lake in Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda called Lake Victoria? That you already get a hint as to what some of the modern day issues that we will come across. And it flows north. So some of the major, it flows, a huge chunk of it goes to Sudan, then it goes into Egypt, and then it empties into the Mediterranean Sea. Very briefly, we'll go through some of the old history, but we'll just do that very quickly. We know of villages and hunting and fishing at the Nile, cattle herding from around 8,000 years before Common Era, meaning roughly dated, if we count the year 0 roughly, as the birth of Prophet Isa alayhi salam, around 8,000 years before that. Again, there's life, there are cities in that area. Around 5,000 BCE, the Sahara starts to dry, and so many people move a little bit further south into the area of Sudan. And then you have the area of eastern Sudan, which is, again, a slightly different group of people. These are people that are more so around the area of Eritrea and Ethiopia. So you kind of have, again, a different group and a mix of people, but modern nation states and, the British didn't really care for what your group is. They just like to make their own lines, which is, again, something that we'll get to. Much of the old history of Sudan actually comes from the Egyptians. In the sense of the Egyptians had a very full-fledged kind of a civilization. They were the ones who had, very well documented, maybe not very well, but documented government and writing and things like that. And so they are the ones who often refer to the land below them, meaning the directly south of Egypt is Sudan, right? And so they would call it as the land of Kush, the land of Kush, right? They would often, in the old kingdom, so around 2,000 to 3,000 years before Prophet Isa alayhi salam, these are the age of the pyramid builders, is where we first kind of get documented mention of, hey, there are a group of people below us, and it's called the people of Kush. And Egypt, would kind of overpower them. They didn't control them, but they kind of, would push them around, because they had access to the Nile, meaning the Nile flows through Sudan up into Egypt. And so they would kind of take advantage of that. But still, they would still do business, and they would trade with them, they would trade with them ivory and incense and hides and the like. And during the kingdom of the pyramid builders, they would sometimes, break into what we would call Sudan, but they didn't really stay there. They didn't really stay there. They didn't try to come over and take over Kush or Sudan. During this time, though, there's just a lot of back and forth. You can imagine, as a border between such a powerful place of the pyramid builders and the consecutive generations and dynasties of the Egyptians, there is back and forth skirmishes. So that boundary, that barrier is always going back and forth between, maybe Sudan gets a little bit up more north, or Egypt will come down a little bit more south. But there's this constant battle that is going on. And for a long time, there was what is generally called the Kingdom of Kush, which is, the Sudan had its own kind of governing body. At some point, it even got to the point that the people of Sudan, the people of Kush, actually came up and took over the vast majority of Egypt, so much so they actually became what we would call, the pharaohs. They actually became the 25th dynasty of in the Egyptian dynasties. So they, at one point, normally Egyptians dominated them in the south, but at one point the people of Sudan actually came up and actually took over the vast majority of Egypt. And one other point, Sudan today, and for a lot of history, would actually touch the Red Sea. The Red Sea is basically what borders Egypt, Sudan, Eritrea, Ethiopia, and then Somalia. And then on the other side would be Saudi Arabia and the bottom of Yemen. And so if you have access to that sea, you get access to a whole lot of trade. You get access to trade with Arabia, with the Hijaz, with Yemen, and also all the traders that are coming in from India. So because of that, Sudan was very open to different cultures and beliefs. If you're a big port city at that time, you get a lot of cultural influence and the like. Now we jump into our common era. So here we're going to have a new section which is going to be around. Now we're looking. So now that was all kind of the land with Egypt and the Egyptians and the like. Now we're kind of looking at Sudan itself, or more so the Nubian kingdoms. Nubia is one of the major regions of Sudan. Nubia is one of the major regions of Sudan. And so there's a northeastern part of Sudan. And it had a kingdom called the Kingdom of Nobatia. There was a central region of Sudan, which is Makuria, and then a southern part of Sudan, which is called Alodia. Now again, as we already see, Sudan, 2,000 years ago, already has different groups amongst them. Already has different kinds of groups amongst them, different kingdoms from amongst them. They have different languages, they have slightly different cultures, they have different kingdoms, and they even have slightly different religions at the time, right? And as we'll see, when you take different groups of people and you mash them and say, you know what, you need to be one country, that never works. That never works. So you have those three kingdoms, and at some point in the 6th century, so 600 Common Era, or the 500s Common Era, the Nobatia, which is the northeastern Sudan, it falls under Makuria, and then you have the southern Sudan, which is primarily Christian. Now here's where we get a good chunk of overlap with the Muslims for a little while, meaning with our Islamic history. There's a good overlap with Islamic history. In 640 Common Era, Amr ibn al-As radiyallahu anhu, the companion, Amr ibn al-As radiyallahu anhu, he conquers Egypt under the Khilaf of Umar ibn al-Khattab. So Umar ibn al-Khattab, Abu Bakr radiyallahu anhu started, kind of to go into the Byzantine Empire, a little bit into the Persian Empire. Umar radiyallahu anhu finalizes that. Persia falls to the Muslims, much of the Byzantine Empire falls to the Muslims, and under the Khilaf of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu, one of his generals, Amr ibn al-As, ends up conquering Egypt. Egypt at that time is under the Byzantine Empire, which is headed by Herakl, and under the head of Egypt was Muqawqis. And the Prophet ﷺ actually wrote letters to both of these people. The Prophet ﷺ wrote a letter to Herakl, the king of the Byzantine Empire, and he wrote a letter to Muqawqis, who was the Christian Copt head of Egypt at that time. But at this point in time, 640 Common Era, the Muslims take over Egypt. Why are we talking about Egypt? We'll see how that relates to Sudan, because again, they're very, very close. Now that the Muslims have taken over Egypt, well, the next place they go is Libya, and then down south to Sudan. Muslims, they tried a few times to get into Sudan. Sudan actually, the Nubians at that time, the Makurians at that time, warded them off. The Muslims were not able to come into Sudan. And then the next Khalifa, Uthman ibn Affan radiyallahu anhu, he comes into power. And again, the Muslims, they try to go into Nubia, they try to go into Sudan, they try to go against the Makurian kingdom. But again, they're unable to. But as a result, I said, we're not going to keep trying. You guys are formidable. Let's just make a peace treaty. So they made a peace treaty called Mu'ahadatul Baqt. And that peace treaty actually lasted for nearly 600 years, or nearly 700 years. Where basically the Muslims of Egypt said, Sudan, fine. You're cool, we're cool. We're not really going to do anything to you. You don't do anything to us. Nearly 700 years. Perhaps this is one of the longest treaties ever. Maybe there's some a little bit tiny back and forth, but for the most part there was a mutual recognition of each other's existence. You are the Muslim government of Egypt, we are Sudan, whatever, we don't bother each other. Maybe we'll give some gifts, our king will give something to your king, etc. And now, so Muslims have been now living in Egypt now. And as Muslims do, not even as Muslims, as people do, they're going to live, they're going to settle. So Muslims, they start making, some towns around the Nile River. And you know what, they start making homes that are further down south in the Nile, closer to Sudan. They marry with some of the people from Beja, which is, the southern Egypt, Eritrea, some of the northern people of Sudan. And when you imagine people have been living there for a while, you trade, you get married, you buy, you sell, you grow animals, you sell crops. Religion, language, and culture slowly transfers. And so the people of South Sudan are now getting slow exposure to Islam. And then from the 8th to 11th century, Christian Nubia, which is again a huge chunk of Sudan, goes through its golden age. Because now they don't have a threat of Egypt, because they have a peace treaty, so they're able to go through all their political and cultural development. They don't have to worry about war. At that time the Umayyads started to decline. And so again, there was not really any kind of bother from amongst them. Maybe they pushed boundaries up and down a little bit, but again, there was no real issue. And Makuria, that's on the northern side of Sudan, and Alodia, which is on the southern side of Sudan, again, they were relatively comfortable. You're your kingdom, we're our kingdom. You're different people, we're different people, no issue. And so something very important to keep, we'll go on a little tangent right here, and that is, maybe this, what would you call it, this assumption or this theory or this criticism of much of the West that Islam was spread by the sword is very clearly debunked in this kind of a scenario, right? And no doubt, were there times where some leaders who happened to be Muslim forced people or pressured people to become Muslim? Yes. Do leaders do bad things throughout human history? Yes. But even if you look at, and I think there's some research by even, again, non-Muslim like Western academic universities that have done this. If you just look at the rate of change in the names of the people of Egypt. Let alone Sudan. Right? Sudan isn't even penetrated by Muslims yet. Right? Egypt itself is conquered in 640 Common Era. And so at that time you can imagine they're like 95% Qibti, yani Christian Copts, Christian Coptics. There up until today, the population of Christian Coptics and Muslims has just been slowly changing. Maybe you can imagine every 100 years, 5% change. 5% become less Christian Copts, those 5% become Muslim. That's why up until today, the Christian Copts still exist in Egypt. Because the Muslims never came there and tried to force them into Islam. Same thing happened in much of the areas about Iraq. They never forced them to do anything. The Muslims, they just said, you know what, you have your city, great. This is our city, we're going to do our own Muslim thing. We're going to buy, we're going to sell, we're the governors, but we're not going to interfere in your life. We're going to pray, we're going to do our religious things. But then they see, wow, you're pretty good people. Wow, you have good governance. Wow, you don't like to steal our money. Wow, you don't like to, kill everybody that does even a minor crime. You're very good people. Wow. One person becomes Muslim, one family becomes Muslim, right? There's not really mass conversions, especially in Egypt and let alone Sudan. A very slow progression of the Christian Copts of Egypt becoming Muslim over time. So when people tell you Islam was spread by the sword, it's just the Khilafah governance. Yes, they fought. That's how the world worked, and it still works like that today. Go and tell the world democracy spread through the gun, not even the gun, like through F-16 fighter jets. That's how American imperialism spread around the world. And the culture at that time, again, we're talking about 8th to the 11th century. They're primarily African, so they don't have much Arab in them. And maybe a little bit of the Roman politics has come into them. A little bit of kind of Arabian culture, Muslim culture starts to develop. Around the 11th and 12th century, so again this is about 1,000 years ago now, Makurya and Lothian, the two main kingdoms, they start to decline. And now you start to get some of the Bedouins start to somewhat take over. People start to migrate, south and west and the like. And this whole time, Muslims are just slowly living, moving down south, making homes in this place, making homes in that place. And so you have much of the places along the Nile. There's just Muslims who are doing their ibadah, focus on tazkiyah. Many of them happen to be Maliki and are influenced into tazkiyah a lot. And so they're just living their life. But people, they just pick up this da'wah. Slowly, people start to become Muslim from the 9th century to the 14th century. Just slowly just being exposed to Islam. Slowly just being exposed to Islam. So now we get into the 1500s, which is now where some of the Islamic kingdoms come about in Sudan. So in 1504, you have a group called the Fanj, which is an African people originating from the south. They start the kingdom of Sanaa. The kingdom of Sanaa. And again, their first king, Amara Qunqas, was actually a previous Christian or a pagan who became Muslim. And the governance of the Funj Sultanate, or Fungistan, or the Sultanate of Sennar, was actually like, we're going to try to be Muslim. We're going to try to implement Islam. But still, you can imagine the spread of Islam is still so slow and so not forced that in this sultanate, like the Sultaniya of Sanaa, they claim to be a Muslim government. Alcohol is still normal for the next 200 years. Like that's how slow and unforced Islam was slowly just trickling into Sudan. And some of them, they still held their Christian practices from the past. Again, because opposed to the Muslims, the Christian missionaries would actually come in, mass convert many of them. As maybe 100 years go by, and now the Ottomans are on the rise, and now the Funj who are in Sudan now start to have issues with the Ottomans who have basically taken over all of Egypt. And the Ottomans, they have now occupied a place called Sawakin, which is one of the major port cities, which is in modern day Sudan. So you can now imagine the Islamic governments and kingdoms of Sudan now start to have a slow skirmish back and forth with the Ottomans. Just like 1,000 years ago they had a back and forth with the Egyptians, again they have a back and forth with the Egyptians, but now the Egyptians are run by the Ottomans. Again, this continues for a while. Again, just a slow back and forth. Islam starts to grow. There's some internal civil wars and some pushback and the like, but for the most part, there's some up and down in this kingdom. But basically, one of the big conclusions is Islam just becomes more prevalent in the area. Islam becomes more prevalent in the area. So at this point, it's been 1,000 years since Islam entered Egypt. And now, like 1,000 years later, is now when Sudan is kind of really becoming like Muslim. Again, anybody tells you Islam was spread by the sword, globally, it doesn't make any sense at all. Now in the 1700s, there's a bigger push, hey, let's be Muslim, let's start to learn Arabic. Arabic starts to become, the dominant language. So now more people are just starting to mix in through marriages and through trade. Arabic starts to become very popular. Islam becomes a more normal thing, especially in the northern and eastern parts of Sudan. Now, in 1750, there's still kind of three main regions, and these three regions kind of still exist today. We have Sanaa, which is the central north or east Sudan, and that's primarily Muslim. And this side borders the Egyptian Ottomans and Eritrea and Ethiopia on the east. You have Darfur, which is on the west side of Sudan, which is bordering Chad. And they again are primarily Muslim, but they're different people. They have their own different kingdoms. And then you have Nubia in the south, which again, they're different people, but they're Christian or they have their native religions. So around 1750, this is the map of Sudan. You have the northern side of Sudan, which is dealing with the Egyptian Ottomans and Ethiopia, they're Muslim. You have the western side of Sudan, which is Darfur, and they're on the west, they're bordering Chad, they're relatively Muslim. And then you have Nubia, which is on the south, which is Christian, and they have maybe some other native religions at that time. Now we get to the 1800s. In the 1800s, I believe 1805, if that's the exact year, Egypt comes under control by a man named Muhammad Ali Pasha. He becomes the governor of Egypt, and basically he was sent by the Ottoman Sultanate to go get Egypt back from the French, from Napoleon. So the French, Napoleon under the French, took over Egypt. Muhammad Ali Pasha is sent as a military general, go get Egypt back. So Muhammad Ali Pasha goes to Egypt, he gets Egypt back. Muhammad Ali Pasha is a very, his own kind of man. So he says, Ottomans, thank you, you made me here, but I'm going to keep Egypt for myself. So he was sent to go and get Egypt back from the French. He now says, Egypt is now mine. You know what, I'm going to go and take some of Sudan too. And you know what, while I'm at it, I'm going to start to take, some of Sham. I'm going to start to take some of Syria. And so he now starts to challenge the Ottoman Empire. He now starts to challenge the Ottoman Empire. And now there's a whole mess where now the Europeans are starting to get involved. You got the French, you got the Germans, you got the Belgians, you got the British, who are all now putting their hands into all these lands that don't belong to them. And it gets to a point where Muhammad Ali Pasha, he tries to take over Syria. There's some back and forth with the Ottomans. And the Ottomans just basically say, you know what, fine, you want to keep Egypt and Sudan, you keep Egypt and Sudan. Just leave Syria, leave the Arab lands. Muhammad Ali Pasha, have your own rule of Egypt and Sudan. We'll just put you under the umbrella of the Ottomans. And so that's what he does. Muhammad Ali Pasha is ruling Egypt, he rules Sudan as an autonomous tributary state of the Ottomans. At this time, the British, the British at this time are touching all over India and Africa. And so the British missionaries, they come into Kenya, which is to the south of Sudan, and now they start to convert the people into Christianity. Some of them are native religions, some of them are already Christian, some of them are Muslim. As we get closer to our time now, we look at 1881. One of the religious leaders named Muhammad Ahmad, he happens in Sudan. He happens to claim himself to be the Mahdi, meaning I am a descendant of the Prophet ﷺ. I'm here to, revive the religion and the like. And so he starts a war to unify all these different tribes in western and central Sudan. He calls his group the Ansar, which some of the remnants now today is called the Ummah Party in Sudan. In 1885, due to the Ottoman Egyptian kind of chaos that's going on, Muhammad Ahmad, who again is kind of now the de facto leader of Sudan, basically just says, you know what, we're leaving all of you. You know what, Ottomans and Egyptians, you kind of are confused, you got your own problems. You know what, we're gonna keep Sudan to ourselves, so we're done with you. So they kind of break off and do their own thing. And at this time, who is involved in now the area around Sudan? You have the Ottomans, the Egyptian Pashas, you have the British, you have the French, you have the Belgians, and you have the Germans. All who are surrounding Sudan from different corners. And again, we just have to ask, why are the British, the French, the Belgians, and the Germans there? Really much of the problems that we see in the world, not to say that, other people aren't to blame or that Muslims aren't to blame, but really, so much of the chaos and the corruption and the bloodshed, even when we get to, modern day, is fueled by these Western powers, that are going to call people of the East backwards, barbaric, confused, whatever, and they are the ones who are fueling the killing and murder and the like. So what is Britain doing, and what are the other European powers doing? In 1896, a Belgian expedition actually takes over parts of the Lado Enclave, which is South Sudan and northwest Uganda. So again, Belgium takes over South Sudan, just as a very brief summary. And later on, they give over that control to the British. The French, on the other hand, are controlling Bahrul Ghazal, like the Sea of Gazelles, which is northwest of the South Sudan. And now we get to 1989, which is going to be a huge shift that's going to come right after this. So 1989, what is that like? Basically 130 years ago, right? So right now we're pausing on 1898. We're going to pause there and just give a brief map of the area at that time. Egypt is basically just a puppet of British control. Northwest Sudan is under this guy that's claiming to be the Mahdi. Some of Eritrea exists on its own, some of Ethiopia exists on its own. Somalia is basically half between the British and Italy. Kenya and Uganda is half between the British and the Germans. And then from the Congo, which is on the Atlantic Ocean, so literally the Atlantic Ocean, the other side of Africa, up until Sudan is that part is now controlled by the French. So it's basically literally just Sudan is kind of its own little bubble, just surrounded by imperial domination. In 1898, sorry, I think I keep saying 19. In 1898, 1898, France and Britain are about to have a huge war, but basically the French, they back down and say, you know what, we're leaving, you keep it. And basically what they meant by this is, you know what, we don't want to fight you, so we're going to say that Sudan, although it's its own government, you know what, we're going to give it to you, Britain. And so that's when the United Kingdom, through the control of Egypt, basically took over Sudan. So what's called the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan. So at that time, basically, Egypt was ruled a lot by the British, and they took control over Sudan. They controlled North and South Sudan as different, separate provinces. And then in 1920, it got to the point where, again, you have to think, Allahu Alam, what are the British doing? The British, they decided to make in the north and the south of Sudan, you have to have passports, there's different business and administrative rules, in just all of these things. The British were heavily involved in the north, and they would start to put people in power as they decided, hey, maybe we want to start leaving from here. As the UK starts to leave around 1943, they start to get North Sudan ready. Hey, you know what? You're going to govern your own selves. You're going to have your own democracy. We're going to give you some leaders and help and all those things, right? You could just all these fake promises and garbage that they're going to leave on top of these people after they have sabotaged their government for decades. In 1946. The British administration basically went back on their split of North and South, and they combined them. The Southerners felt very betrayed. We are different people, so the people of South Sudan are saying, we are different than the people of North Sudan. You have always treated us differently. Why are you making us one government? Also, the people of the north primarily know Arabic. We were primarily taught English. So how is this new government going to work? Also, British, the OU Brits, you had 800 spots in your government. You only gave 4 to the entirety of South Sudan in this new government. And so it's just so much headache with what the British did. Now, in February 12th of 1953, the United Kingdom and Egypt basically said, you know what? Sudan, you're on your own, bye. Right? Really, in one way, you can imagine that the United Kingdom saying, look, we're letting Sudan gain their independence. Really, at the end of the day, it's probably just, we don't want to deal with, we got too much stuff to deal with. You deal with your own problems, basically. You deal with your own problems. We don't want to deal with this anymore. It's too big of a headache for us. Right? And so, the Britons slowly start to leave. In 1954, you have the first parliament. In 1955, when Sudan kind of really comes into play, before they have their first, declaration of independence, there is their first issue that breaks out, and that is, again, the South has basically been given the short side of the stick by the British people that set up this new government. And so the South, obviously upset, they basically revolt against this new country of Sudan, meaning there's the North and the South, but they have all been bundled into one. So the South, they revolt, which ends up leading to a 17-year-long civil war in Sudan, as still one country. In the December of 1955, the Sudan itself says, we are independent, we are our own independent nation. And then on January 1st, basically, Egyptians and the British say, we accept your independence. At this time, again, there's just a lot of back and forth, different, skirmishes, wars, different civil wars, either between the North and the South, or perhaps between the East and the West, which is going to be the Khartoum, which is the modern-day capital, and the West, which is going to be Darfur. And as we mentioned, these 3 remnants still remain today. The eastern central part, which is Khartoum, that part of Sudan is, you can say, a lot of Arab influence, and they're Muslim. The western side of Darfur, with the western side, which is Darfur, these are like African tribes who happen to be Muslim. And then you have the southern side, which most of them are primarily not Muslim. Most of them are Christian. And again, they're different people. So you have these 3 groups. You have, again, the northeastern, which is a huge chunk, which we will just call Khartoum going forward. You have the west, which is Darfur, and you have the south. There's civil war, followed by a republic, followed by a revolution, followed by a different republic, followed by a civil war, followed by another coup, followed by another coup, followed by revolution after coup, after coup, after coup. So now we're very close into our modern day today. So now we're kind of at the times of 1955, 1956 and the like. First civil war, as we said, was 17 years, 1955 to 1972. Then the Republic of Sudan is born out of that, so the 1956. Then there's another coup in 1969, which leads to a different government. There's a second civil war from 1983 to 2005, which is then followed by the Republic of Sudan. And the Republic of Sudan, basically from that 1986 up until 2019, is then replaced with the coup. In that basic government of what would say 1986 to 2019 and the like, one of the main leaders was Umar al-Bashir. When we get into the modern day names, just to be very clear, if I say something good or bad about somebody, I am just saying what they did. I'm just saying what they did. So nobody really cared. The people, whoever I mention. So anybody I mention now, meaning these are people. Mm-hmm.
want the president and take Najib out. So they send Najib to Sudan to make election because Najib's mom is Sudanese and his dad is Egyptian. So they send to vote on whether they give Sudan is independent or not. And of course, the revolution is a military revolution.
Yeah.
Of course, they send Najib, and as soon as he went to Sudan, they made a meeting and elect to take him out and put Nasser instead. And that's the price was that is the division of Egypt and Sudan, which is by the choice of the Brits, but the Brits always behind any musiba.
Yeah, so.
Happened this way, and Egypt and Sudan became two countries, which was never happened before. It was always one country, so the rest.
So at that point, as you mentioned, right around 1955 was when the British that were controlling Egypt, they basically said, you know what, we are going to let Sudan go. Sudan will be its own country. And then that's when these issues started to come up, because when the British left Sudan, they were originally had a north and a south, forgetting that there's an east and a west as well inside. But they left the north and the south. They treated them separate, but right before they left, they said, you know what, you're going to be one country. So they made both the north and the south of Sudan into one country, and then they left them in that mess. And that's where that triggered the first civil war. And now from there back and forth, there has been a civil war, back and forth, different coups, different governments coming into power, and the like. Again, all of this at the end of the day really boils down to, not all of it, but the vast majority boils down to European imperialist powers that are coming in and shoving different people that do not have the same culture, the same language, the same religion, and say, you know what, you're all going to be one people, here you go, have a good day, right? When they were fine for hundreds of years as north and the south and the west, right? And they had little back and forth, but for the most part, they were relatively stable and fine. In fact, that's when they even had some of their golden ages. Now, as in our modern time, one of those most recent leaders of Sudan as a whole, north and south, was Umar al-Bashir. And again, he received a lot of sanctions from the world, particularly the US. And so times, again, regardless of the good or bad or whatever was done in his time, the fact that he was sanctioned by the US just made times in Sudan very difficult. Access to food, water, trade with anybody else becomes very, very difficult. Even their oil resources, again, is very hard to export because they have sanctions on them. Yet still, in that time, whatever issues did come up with the West and the South, Bashir would still try to reconcile. Say, you know what, you South, you know what, you don't want to be with us, fine. We'll make one of your heads the vice president of Sudan. And he would do this kind of back and forth between the South and the West of just trying to appease the different parties and the like. But one thing to note, which ties us into, here we're talking about genocide and, Muslims being hurt. One of the things that he and Sudan stood strong for a long time was, we do not accept Zionism. We do not accept Zionism. And when a country around the Middle East does not like Zionism, what does America want to do? America never got involved here, but now America wants to get involved here, and so in 2011, and some of this happened in 2005 as well. Southern Sudan wants to leave, and so at the end of the day, the governments really just say, you know what, you have never been North Sudan, South Sudan, you've always been your own thing. Fine, South Sudan, you go and be South Sudan. And there was a vote, and basically there was I don't want to say a seamless, but North and South Sudan split. That is what the countries are today. You have Sudan, and you have South Sudan. And then in April 2019, Umar al-Bashir, again, who was the president for a long time, was now ousted, and now the government fell under basically a transitional government. A transitional government in April 2019, particularly around the 15th of April, which happened to be in Ramadan, and that's where the civil war breaks out. So now basically we're in April 5th, sorry, I skipped a few years. In 2019 is where there's a transitional government that goes on after they kick out their president Umar al-Bashir, and there's a transitionary government that's in play. Then in 4 years later, in 2023, there's a civil war that breaks out between essentially the military army, which is the government of Sudan, the military government of Sudan, like the Sudan Armed Forces, the Sudanese army, and then a different group on the west from Darfur, which is the Rapid Support Forces. Originally, the Rapid Support Forces was made by the Sudanese government to just be a means to protect from any possible invasion from any of the western sides, meaning from Chad or. Yes, was supposed to protect al-Bashir from the western countries that are there. But after he's ousted, now you have this military government of Sudan, and now the rapid forces, which are in Darfur, who are on the western side, now in April of 2023, they now start to attack Khartoum, which is the capital.
They got funded by Emirates, and they became Emirate military. They went over there to Libya to get involved in
Yeah.
Sudan.
Yeah, so that's where we are now, right? So the Rapid Support Forces who are in Darfur, they are primarily funded and get much of their money and access from America and the UAE. And without getting into the reasons why, but essentially what the America is trying to tell all of Sudan essentially is, and what the fear is and what they're telling all of these different parties that they're funding and they want to get out is, you have a government in Sudan. You are right now the leaders of Sudan. You just want to stay in charge of Sudan. Because if you have a democratic election, the mass majority, your major population is Muslim, and Muslims are going to be inclined towards a Muslim leader. At the end of the day, if you let your people vote, they're going to vote for a Muslim leader. The Americans in the UAE, they don't want that. For two reasons. Because as we mentioned before, the government of Sudan before was anti-Zionist. Now, these new governments that are popping up that are funded by America and the UAE, recently they have made allies and have made peace with Israel, right? And so that is something, again, that America is very much trying to work towards. If we do not want people wanting Muslim leaders, we want very, liberal kind of mindset of political parties here that will do what we want them to do. We want to instill governments and militaries that will do what we, as Americans, want you to do in Sudan. And so that's why they are funding them. And so now you have, again, this western side, the Rapid Support Forces, who are attacking the capital of Khartoum, who are now trying to break down and destroy the Sudanese army. From America's perspective, the Sudanese army is by definition an army that was born that dislikes Zionism and dislikes the institution of Israel. America says all of the armies in that entire region, we want to destroy you and then rebuild you. Exactly what they did in Iraq. We're going to destroy you and then we're going to put people in charge, and you can do whatever you want as long as you follow what we want you to do. And so essentially they're trying to destroy Sudan from inside out so that they can have their own people, their own justification, their own political ideas that are there, so they can have American influence there, they can have Israeli influence there, and slowly just break the country from the inside out. And where the genocide does come into play is that these Rapid Support Forces in Darfur are actually killing so many of their internal people. It's because they're Muslim, and you're saying, why are you, meaning as the Rapid Support Forces, why are you fighting these people, the army of Sudan? They are Muslim, we are Muslim. We all kind of want a Muslim-esque government. Why are you allying with non-Muslim groups to go and destroy whatever Muslim government kind of thing we did have? Again, it's not that it was perfect. It's not that it was great by any stretch of the world, of any means, but why are you doing this? And so to repel that, the Rapid Support Forces are now killing their own people within Darfur to hush and put down any of this kind of.
Actually, Emirates is the front man for Israel. So they've been buying a huge amount of land in Sudan and a huge amount of land in Egypt. And they turn around and, of course, the money is coming from Israel. And eventually going to be flip over somehow. And Emirates doesn't have anything but money that's funded from Israel. So they try to get this land and try to get military to protect this land because the situation in Egypt is really So anyway, it would flip. So they try to get military and they get the weapon
to the rapid support forces in the west. Yeah.
In case something happens in Egypt, so they find some military to protect this land. They think that it to be Emirati land or something.
Yeah, So that could also be another reason of just, again, they want their own militaries in that region to pressure out the Sudanese military that already exists and for whatever other protection they need from any other governments. And so that's essentially where we are today. That much of the civil war that's going on now is primarily fueled by outside sources from the US and the UAE to literally destroy these two armies of Sudan, basically from the inside out. And at this point, there are probably at least, if not more, 24,000 people have been killed. And probably more than that, that's just been through actual like weaponry and fighting. Probably more than that have been killed and died due to injury, due to disease, malnourishment, not having food or healthcare. At least, nearly 7 million, if not some even say 11 or 14 million people have had to leave their homes. Imagine in a country that big, 7 million people have to leave their homes. And there's probably over 10,000 cases of cholera. And not only that, they're going through this and they're getting so much rainfall, widespread flooding, and again, so much disease. Some reports even say to help the people of Sudan get the adequate help they need, they're going to need like $3 billion. As a humanity, as a Muslim ummah, we can do it. But we need to care and focus and put our attention there, which is why we have this program tonight. There's at least 18 million people who are facing severe hunger. Right? There over, again, nearly 30,000 civilians who have been injured. Right? There are, just since 2024, or in 2024, just this year, there's probably almost 25 million people that need assistance. Not in the world, just in Sudan. There are around 3.5 million children who, again, are malnourished. And again, much of these attacks are not happening on a battlefield, they're happening around the capital of Khartoum. Half the hospitals in Khartoum are damaged or destroyed, right? And so this is really something for us to keep in mind of, what, we can, from one angle, there is our responsibility of why are these external governments, getting involved. There's another aspect of, can we bring about, unity and peace in that region without these external forces? Just from the Sudanese American Physician Association, one of the comments that they made was, in helps from government, was secure a ceasefire and end external interference fueling the conflict. Civilians will remain under the threat as long as this war continues. Member states must exert greater pressure on the warring parties to negotiate an immediate end to the violence. All forms of external support, whether political, financial, or military, must be cut off, as these external influences are fueling the conflict and prolonging the suffering of innocent civilians. Without decisive action to halt this interference, the violence will only escalate. So very, without naming anybody, they're making it very clear of, if you're not from here, please get out. And that will severely bring down, much of the issues that are going around today. And again, just, as Muslims, we should care just because we're human beings. But on top of that, we should have an even additional level of care on top of the care that we already should have. 97% of Sudan is Muslim, right? Even for the 3% that are Christian or not even Christian, if they're being killed, if they're being caught in this, fire, if there's something we can do, may Allah, give us the ability, the wealth, and the strength to do that. And then even just from a perspective of the growth and the flourishing and the beauty of Islam, there's an entire genre of just shi'r al-Sudani, like just Sudanese Arabic poetry. And you can literally go online into the international Quran competitions, you'll find, young men and women from Sudan who are competing. These are places where you have hufaz and qurra that are coming. Even I was trying to find, some notable Sudanese ulama and the like. They definitely exist, but I ended up finding a book that was written that's the biographies of some of the major qurra, the reciters after the 18th century. And so many of the qurra, the expert teachers of Quran, they have students that are from Sudan. You can imagine they are producing this kind of qurra, this kind of people that are going to produce Arabic poetry and be reciters of the Quran, while in constant civil war and turmoil and unrest. If you free them from all of this, just how much will their Islam flourish? How much will their lives be better? Right? And so it's in our best interest, it's in their best interest, in the best interest of the world to get these external forces out of there and to stop this civil war and to stop the people of Darfur from killing their own selves and committing genocide. And so, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to, give us the strength, give us the ability to be able to do something that, alhamdulillah, Allah, you have given us the opportunity. Oh Allah, we thank you, Allahumma laka alhamdu kama yanbaghi li jalali wajhika wa azimi sultanik, that you allowed us to learn about what is going on, that you gave us some glimpse into, the horrible things that outside forces are perpetrating into the lands of the Muslims. Oh Allah, help our Muslim brothers and sisters. Oh Allah, alleviate their pain and their suffering. Oh Allah, allow them to be freed and to be rid of these external forces. Oh Allah, allow them to have their own, governments and leaders that they incline towards Muslim leaders by choice. Oh Allah, allow them to live lives that are civil, lives that are not tarnished by war, lives in which they can grow up and go to school and get married and have children. Oh Allah, allow them to live happy, healthy lives. Oh Allah, give those that are hungry from amongst them food. Allah, give those from amongst them that are injured and or diseased, give them healing and give them cure. Oh Allah, give them leaders and give them governments that will be sound, that will protect these places. Oh Allah, give them leaders that are Muslim, that are going to be just. Oh Allah, give them leaders that are going to be Muslim, that are going to be just. Oh Allah, give them just Muslim leaders. Oh Allah, give us the strength to do something. Oh Allah, give us the quwwah, the shaja'ah, the courage, the bravery to do something. Oh Allah, give us the wealth to give. And oh Allah, make us generous enough to give. Oh Allah, make us generous enough to give and bless our giving. Allow the money that we send, be it 50 cents, be it $1, be it $10,000, be it $1 million. Oh Allah, allow our giving, allow the money that we send to them for your sake, to please you, because you made us Muslim. Allow it to have an impact. Allah, allow it to help them. Allah, allow it to alleviate their suffering. Allah, give us the means, give us an insight, give us an opening into what we can do to resolve the issue and not just help the people that are suffering, but stop the suffering. Oh Allah, give us insight, give us action, give us direction into actually helping solve the situation. Allah, these situations are very hard for somebody that is not an expert in this. So Allah, show us what is truth as truth and allow us to follow it. Show us the falsehood as falsehood and allow us to stay away from it. Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqa wa rizqna ittiba'ah wa arina al-batila batilan wa rizqna ijtinabah. Allahumma ansuri al-muslimina fi kulli makan. اللهم انصر إخواننا المظلومين في السودان. اللهم انصرهم، اللهم انصرهم، اللهم أيدهم، اللهم ثبت أقدامهم، اللهم انصرهم، اللهم فرج عنهم، اللهم أطعمهم واسقهم. Oh Allah, give them food and drink. Oh Allah, support them. Oh Allah, aid them. Oh Allah, give them an opening. Oh Allah, make it easy for them. Oh Allah, allow them to get out of this mess. Oh Allah, allow them to get out of this difficulty. Oh Allah, allow them to live and to see healthy lives and a healthy future. And oh Allah, we don't ask you not just for them, but for all of our Muslim brothers and sisters around the world. Allahumma ansur ikhwanana al-mazlumeen fi Gaza, wa fi Palestine, wa fi Lebanon, wa fi Syria, wa fi Yemen, wa fi Kashmir, wa fi Sin, wa fi Hind, wa fi Burma, wa fi kulli makan. Oh Allah, help all of our brothers and sisters around the world, be it in Palestine, be it in Lebanon, be it in Syria, be it in Yemen, be it in Kashmir, be it in China, be it in India, be it in Burma, be it in this country. Oh Allah, help them. Oh Allah, alleviate their suffering. Oh Allah, give them strength. Oh Allah, give them patience. Oh Allah, those of them that have died for your cause, oh Allah, accept their martyrdom. Oh Allah, grant them the rank of shuhada, grant them the rank of martyrs. Oh Allah, make it easy for their families. Oh Allah, give them food. Oh Allah, heal them. Oh Allah, remove their suffering. And oh Allah, deal with their oppressors. Allahumma ansurhum ala man bagha alayhim. Allahumma alayka bil-zalimin. La taj'alna min al-zalimin. Allahumma ba'id baynana wa bayna al-zulmi wa ma'asiyatik. Allahumma ahlik al-zalimin. Allahumma ja'al halakahum ibratan lil alameen. O Allah, deal with their oppressors. O Allah, remove their oppressors. O Allah, remove their oppressors. Give them the strength to deal with their oppressors. O Allah, do not make us accomplices to oppression. O Allah, do not make us helpers to oppression. O Allah, do not allow our posts, our activism, our votes, our money, our involvement, our associations, the clothes that we buy, the phones that we buy. Allah, do not allow anything that we do, although it may be very close. Allah, save us from oppression. O Allah, save us from helping oppressors. O Allah, save us from being involved in any kind of dhulm, any kind of tughyan, any kind of oppression. O Allah, save us from that. O Allah, if some of our money has been involved, if some of our votes have been involved, O Allah, please forgive us. O Allah, please show us the truth as truth. Allow us to act in the true, correct way. And O Allah, save us from doing wrong. Save us from slipping. Save us from making mistakes. O Allah, protect us from ever hurting another person. Allah, protect us from ever harming or taking the honor or unlawfully hurting somebody else. Allah, save us from dhulm. Allah, save us from disobeying you. Allah, save us from hurting another Muslim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. Allahumma barik ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. And it's just after our dua, again, we remind ourselves too, there's always two sides to this coin. Whatever we can do physically, what I mean by physically is externally. If I can donate, if I can spread awareness, if I can speak out, if I can say something, that is something that I definitely should do. In one way, shape or form, it is wajib on me. In one way, shape or form, it is necessary for me to at least do or say something. If I can give 50 cents, give 50 cents. You just don't go and buy a chocolate bar or whatever they have outside. They have some cakes and some cookies at their bake sale. Even if 1 cent goes to that, may Allah count that 1 cent as Allah, I tried to help put a band-aid on somebody. That's one side of our effort, and our other side of our effort is what we do internally inside our spirituality, that we make dua, that Allah sincerely helps them, that Allah gives them help and victory. The best combination is during the night I pray, and during the daytime I do something physical. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from us and alleviate their suffering, and again give us the strength, the bravery, the shaja'ah to do something and put barakah in whatever we do. Again, I want to encourage everybody, there's a big sale outside for Sudan. Please go and participate. I know we've gone a little bit long. If you have any questions, you can just ask me outside, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanallah al-azim. Subhanaka wa bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.